This is the Road Home podcast with author and teacher Ethan Nichtern. Through the lens of mindfulness and engaged Buddhism, Ethan and guests explore culture, art, politics, psychology, and spiritual practice with an eye toward both personal and collective transformation. For more information, visit www.ethannichtern.com.
So hi everybody, this is Ethan Nichtern for The Road Home. Really excited about today's podcast with friend and astrologer and dharma practitioner Juliana McCarthy, wherein she says that we happen to be alive during possibly the most significant, astrologically significant moment in human history. So please keep listening if you want more details about that. But first, wanted to share a few things from our sponsor, Dharma Moon, dharmamoon.com, which is in general a great online meditation and Buddhist community. So you can go to dharmamoon.com and get on the email list. You can find downloadable ebooks about teaching meditation, great full course, Foundations of Mindfulness, taught by my father, David Nichtern, which is a great gift for a friend making a New Year's resolution. And a couple of events coming up that I'll be involved with that are free events. First, we'll be doing my annual New Year's Eve, afternoon of New Year's Eve, intention setting and meditation gathering at 3 p.m. Eastern, 12 noon Pacific on December 31st. That's a free or pay what you can event. Suggested donation is $10 to $20, but if you don't have the money, you can just sign up for free, and we would love to see you there. It's become a real annual tradition. And on Tuesday, January 9th, I'm really excited to be in conversation, again, a free online event from 6 p.m. to 7:30 p.m. Eastern Time with my friend Shelly Tegelski, who's a great mindfulness teacher, activist, philanthropist, and general badass helper in the world. We're going to be talking about right livelihood, what capitalism can learn from Buddhism, if anything, right? There might be some of you saying, is capitalism actually teachable? But we will get into that. And that's all in lead up to the year-long Buddhist Studies program that I lead with an awesome faculty of 5 great teachers, which begins on January 23rd, Tuesday evenings. Would really love for people to get more into that if you're looking for a great community and to do a little bit deeper dive into studying Buddhism and building a meditation practice with a supportive group of teachers and community. We'll go obviously much deeper than we could ever go on a podcast. So all of that information is at dharmamoon.com, and lots of great offerings there. And thank you so much to Dharma Moon for sponsoring the podcast. Now, my guest on this episode is a return visitor to the Road Home, astrologer, author, and dharma practitioner Juliana McCarthy. If you're interested in her work, she wrote a really great book called The Stars Within You, A Guide to Modern Astrology, really beautiful overview and introduction of astrology with great illustrations by our friend Alejandro Cardenas. Got to give him a shout out. Juliana has been teaching evolutionary astrology for over 20 years. She loves working with people to help them understand their authentic selves, their complexities, gifts, karma, and life paths. But you can find out more information and get on her email list for workshops and monthly events at etherealculture.com. That's etherealculture.com. But definitely check out her book, The Stars Within You, if you're interested in more information. And now we're going to get to the conversation where Juliana refers to us as living through possibly the most significant astrological moment in human history.
All right. So hi, everybody. This is The Road Home. This is Ethan Nichtern. I'm here with my friend, longtime friend at this point, Juliana McCarthy, we've had on the podcast before, but Juliana is the author of the book, The Stars Within You, A Modern Guide to Astrology. She's a longtime dharma practitioner, along with many other or several other spiritual modalities, and she is an astrological genius. So I want to have her back on. And I think this is worth cursing about. The main topic I want to talk about is what the fuck is going on here, and what is the astrology of 2024. So, but before we get to that, hi friend, hi Juliana, it's nice to see you.
Hi, good to see you. Thank you so much for having me back.
Yeah. So I don't think we need to get too much into, why I care about astrology, because I imagine that the people who might listen to a more secular Buddhist podcast who are, scientific atheists who would say, I imagine them saying like, oh, that's hogwash. I just imagine like scientific atheists using the term hogwash. So they've probably already skipped this episode, but how do you describe the power of astrology to somebody maybe who's like a little bit more on the fence? Like, oh, there seems to be something there, but like, I've always wondered why the moment and place that you came out of your mother determines your entire like astrological makeup,
I mean, me too. But the way that we work with astrology, we look at the birth chart, which is the moment of your first breath, right? So some people say like, well, what if I was a C-section? What if I was meant to be born at a different time? It doesn't matter. It's just the moment of your first breath, and that karma is the causes and conditions that came together for you to take your first breath right then and there. So um, I don't, I started studying astrology just for fun, and I was like, how is this so accurate, because it was like getting very specific. I was reading the only astrology book you'll ever need. It was like 20 something years ago, and it was very specific, and I didn't understand how it could be so specific. I was a scientific person. I was really into theoretical physics at that stage in my life, and I started studying it more to try to find the loophole. It's almost like trying to figure out how the magic trick works,
Mm-hmm.
And the more I studied it, the more accurate it became. And I finally gave up and just said, you know what, experientially, this works. People were like crying when I'd read their charts, and I wasn't particularly good with people at that stage of my life. And so I was like, all right, they feel understood by me. This is new, you know. And so I in my efforts to disprove it, I just became an expert in it and realized that for whatever reason, it's just extremely accurate.
I mean, that is the scientific method, right? You set out to disprove something and it survives the disproval, then it's verified to a certain degree, right?
Yeah, I can't explain why.
Yeah, yeah.
The closest I came was I did an ayahuasca ceremony one time, and I was in Joshua Tree, and I walked outside of the yurt, and I looked up at the like glistening sky, like just full of stars, and all the stars were like moving and talking to me very vividly. And they said, we speak to you all the time, right? And I was like, I kind of knew that, but not this vividly, not this literally.
All right. If there were any scientific atheists holding on that paragraph that you just spoke, like knock them off the podcast. So, but for everyone else, which I think is most people, have some sense. Don't you feel like most people now are interested in sort of some balance between spirituality and object-based or material science? Like some people are kind of balancing the two.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's arrogant to think that the only thing that's real is things that we can prove, with our puny human minds and our limitations. It's like we're only working within 4 dimensions, the 3 dimensions of space, the 1 dimension of time. And there's so much operating outside of those dimensions that we relate with every day. things like love, things like psychic perception, which mothers have and everyone talks about. It's like, it's real, but it makes sense that there are things we can't understand and we can't prove. And I think that it actually is scientific to understand that.
Yeah.
It's not scientific to think there's nothing that we can't perceive that's real.
Right. And you have just me checking in with you. So your monthly updates via Ethereal Culture and Juliana, if you're on social media, is at Ethereal Culture with an E-E-T. Hereal. I spelled it right.
Yeah.
But your monthly updates always have a lot of nuggets of wisdom in them. And then I remember you actually calling specific political events, that were not callable. Like I remember when texting with you when the Georgia runoff Senate elections were happening after the 2020 election. And you were like, John Ossoff is definitely going to win. And he ended up winning by less than 0.5%. But I remember you being very sure of it because his chart dictated a long political career or something like that.
Yeah, he was destined to win. Yeah, astrologically, and he did. So yeah, I mean that's like, I mean my career blew up after the pandemic because I had for years been going around the world teaching at music festivals and workshops and whatever about the paradigm shift of 2020. And I said reality as we know it is going to completely change, in 2020. And then it did, and everyone was like, oh my God, how did you know that? And I'm like, well, because it's Saturn, Pluto, and Jupiter were all going to line up in an auspicious, rare 2000+ year alignment.
Yeah. So I guess let's start there. I mean, people have obviously very different personal experiences just in their life and their astrological chart. And I would say, like, I hung out with a friend who I had not seen in person since 2017, my friend Meredith, who lives in Seattle, and hadn't seen her. Like the last time I saw her, I brought my daughter, who's now 6.5, who was like a 2-month-old baby, and we got coffee. That was the last time we saw each other. And then I just described my life from fall of 2017 onward, and it's just bonkers, like just the things that have changed. I mean, I'm completely fine at the same time and privileged, but I feel like I've actually started living, how people had stories to tell. And as a writer, I was like, I don't really know that I have a story to tell about myself. I have a few stories to tell, but like since 2017, I was like, God, things just keep getting weirder and weirder. And it seems like that's true of the world too, right? I mean,
For sure.
this year.
Yeah.
So what's happening this era in the stars and the planets?
Well, a lot. Like we happen to be alive at the most significant astrological moment and in kind of in human history. And
Whoa.
yeah, I mean debatable, but arguable. Yeah. And it's because we're ending a 2000+ year age in humanity and beginning a new one. And that has to do with where the Earth's axis is pointing. So we're going from the Piscean age, which started around the quote unquote birth of Christ, and it's now ending. And we're going now into the Aquarian age. And the Aquarian age is an age of egalitarianism, and it's an age of where we're moving away from Christianity and colonialism and all the things connected to the Christian age. And we're now moving into this age of more like science and technology and egalitarianism and all the things that rebellion and revolution. And I keep thinking about the mid 60s where Uranus and those energies were very heightened. And there were a lot of thinkers at that time who were talking about the future and future possibilities and potentials and how we could reinvent cities and life and the way we live, but we didn't really implement them, like I think about Bucky Fuller, for example. And now as we step across the threshold, which is really this year and the next 2 years, it's like a major period of entering into that new age because Pluto's moving into Aquarius. which is very rare. It hasn't moved into Aquarius for, 200 and something years, and since the beginning of the United States. And so it's this moment where we are really confronting and destroying the old paradigm and stepping into the new paradigm. And I think we're seeing the results of that. Like there's a lot that's on the table. And as we cross this threshold, this is the time when the ideas of the 60s might actually get implemented, where we might revisit some of those people who seemed like they were wild, out of the box thinkers, and bring that into the everyday fabric of reality somehow.
So right now, these few years is the actual astrological beginning of the age of Aquarius.
Well, it's been a process, but with
Okay, that's why that song from the 70s was.
Yeah. Yeah. We've kind of been moving there for a while, right? It's like we're thinking of 2,000-year ages. So it's not like, oh, next day we're in the next age in humanity, right? It's a transition.
Right.
But there are certain indicators of that transition. And 2020 was kind of like the height of destroying the old paradigm.
Mm.
And now we're going into the birth of the new paradigm in a much more heightened way this year, as Pluto fully moves into Aquarius by November of 2024. And then 2025 and 2026, when Pluto at the beginning of Aquarius is trining Uranus at the beginning of Gemini. Like this is like the revolution, the rebirth of the next iteration of humanity. And it's not hopefully going to feel as much like we're beating our heads against the wall of the old ways and fighting these oppressive forces without making headway. It's going to feel like we're able to make more headway somehow.
So November 2024 is a big moment. I don't know anything that's happening in the United States in November 2024.
Right. The presidential election. So and I'm telling you, think about birth, right? Birth is not without drama and it's not without pain. So it's not going to be an easy birth, right? But I do feel like there's something more hopeful starting to pour in this year, and there's something massively unsticking this year, which I think feels like a relief,
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So what, so what are the forces so you said Christianity, what are the other forces of like, how would you define, or astrologically, like, either, just using your own thoughts, or, the language of astrology, like what have been some of the dominant forces of, because we're not even talking about like since the Industrial Revolution. We're not talking about like since Trump was elected. You're talking about a 2,000-year period in history.
Yeah, there are multiple eras within the 2000-year era wrapping up as well, right? So I think this is the end of the sort of, it's hard to say the end of, but we are confronting, destroying, and reinventing our old ways, which include sort of imperialism, capitalism, like propagandizing the public in order to consume more, invading countries, for oil, right? Or to purposely destabilizing and terrorizing nations and countries in order to whatever, like have more power, like this sort of oppression and genocide, for lithium batteries, for example, or, it's all over the world right now, right? It's that kind of thing isn't going to fly in this new era. And we're already seeing like the younger generations, like millennials are the Pluto Scorpio generation and Gen Zers are the Pluto Sag generation. And they're the first generations for a long time that are revolutionary generations. So the Pluto Scorpio generation I call them the Harry Potter and 50 Shades of Grey generation, but it's like Scorpio, you think of like the depths and the taboos and the kind of confrontations of power. Like they were meant to extract things from the shadows that like Pluto Leo, Pluto Virgo, and Pluto Libra, which, you know, Pluto Libra is us, the Gen Xers. We were too like our generation was like the whatever generation, right? We couldn't be bothered.
We really were.
Yeah, that was our rebellion, was just not caring, you know. It wasn't like, what are you doing? It was just like, you can't be bothered. You
I
know?
mean, whenever you listen and go back and listen to 90s music, like every dilemma was self-created, you know, and like it's all existential stuff. There's not like a lot of real, you know, external stuff going on in our
Yeah.
generation. It's like
It wasn't cool to be like a rebel. I mean, it wasn't cool to be like an activist, you know,
mm,
it was cool to be passive.
mm,
And that was Gen X. And that's very Pluto Libra. Libra is very passive, you know? And then,
diplomatic, right?
yeah. And then the Pluto Virgo, those are the yuppies, you know? They're just like the secretaries to the boomers or whatever. And they're not going
Mm,
to like really challenge anything. And then Pluto Leo was like, you know, the Mick Jagger generation, right? It was a lot of performers. Leo's all about performance. When Pluto first moved into Leo, that was McCarthyism, right? So it was this abuse
mm,
of power is a theme. And the narcissist, there's like narcissism, like it's, I'm not saying everyone who's in that generation is narcissistic, but it was generally like a narcissistic generation where there was a lot of emphasis on the external, and there was a lot of beauty and an incredible culture that came from that. But there wasn't a generation until Pluto Scorpio that was ready to challenge the power of the Pluto Leo generation or the boomers. And Scorpio and Leo both want power, but in different ways.
mm.
Leo is pompous, like, hello, I'm the king, bow to me. You know, Scorpio is behind the scenes, like destroying everything. You know? So you think about Me Too or BLM, it's just like, nope, you know, and it's like, oh, this is uncomfortable to talk about the rape, you know, of these people who I don't care. We're going to talk about it, you know, and they're just like, is it uncomfortable to talk about racism? I don't care. We're going to talk about it. It's uncomfortable to admit your white fragility. I don't care. We're going to talk about it. Right. So it's like that confrontation and
Mm,
destruction, right? In order to rebirth was the Scorpio generation. They're very psychological, very much into the occult. And they grew up with Harry Potter, you know, into astrology. And then Pluto Sag is religion, ideology, morals. Pluto is the planet of death, destruction, and rebirth. They're here to destroy and rebirth our ideological frameworks, you know,
mm,
our belief systems, our religions. And you think of the first like big star to come out of that generation was Greta Thunberg, you
mm.
know, and that's definitely what she's doing and has been doing.
Yeah. So I'm just wondering offhand because I have a first grader. Is that Gen Alpha? What's the generation after Gen Z?
That's the Pluto Cap generation. So what's interesting is it's like after all this confrontation and rebirthing, we have the Pluto Cap generation coming in, and they're more traditional, and they're like, let's build, right? We
Right.
need sanity, we need structures, we need traditions, we need new traditions, you know, we need systems. And so they're actually more practical.
Mm,
Uh, and they're more subdued, which makes sense because it tends to go like that, where we have new energies coming in with each generation that are
yeah.
different.
So technology is a huge part of this moment as well, right?
Yes,
Like
100%.
like the main part of this moment, or I mean, there's no one main part of this moment. It's
Well,
complex, right?
yeah. I mean, if you think of Uranus and you think of Aquarius, both Uranus rules Aquarius, and they have to do with technology 1000%. Rebellion, revolution, egalitarianism, right? So I think those are the main themes.
Mm,
I also like if you look at the zodiac wheel, it goes in order, right? So it begins with
mm,
Aries, the baby, everything's new, fresh. You have confidence, the Fool and Tarot. You don't have any memory of defeat to impede you from leaping. And then Pisces is the last sign, which is transcending into space, dissolving into space. So Aquarius is the second to last sign, and I call it the pinnacle of human potential. And it's about how do we create enlightened society, you
mm,
know, and it requires respecting each individual, honoring each individual, uh, in order to have this enlightened society. And so it's very much about egalitarianism and making sure everyone has their basic needs met, diversification of power, and it's more about like lateral circles as a power structure rather than top-down hierarchy. So that's where we're at. So technology 100% is Aquarian. Electricity, like I mean, my friend Torrance and I taught a class on the astrology of 2024, and we were looking at Jupiter and Gemini, which is happening this year, and the Jupiter Uranus conjunction April 20th that's happening. And historically, electromagnetic storms have been connected to those kinds of transits. So we were like, that's a possibility. Something shocking is bound to happen that's ultimately liberating, but it could be something that seems terrible at first, and it could be something like an electromagnetic storm that like does away with the internet for 3 months or something like that.
Right. You said that to me last week, and based on what you and others have said, and just based on kind of intuition with how oddball things have gotten, like I just think we're going to get some major curveballs this year, and it's not going to be like will Trump or Biden win. I think those are both like fastballs down the middle. It's going to be like shit we never saw coming. So
100%.
You said the thing about electromagnetic storm that might take out the internet for a few months. And then I talked to my friend Jerry, who's a very scientific guy who he used to he was the creator of the show Brain Games that was on National Geographic. So he was like, "Oh, that actually is a problem." And he was like, "It's not likely, but like solar flares and are getting stronger." And he was like, the way the layering of the satellites around the earth work, he basically explained it to me much smarter than I could explain it. But he was like, yeah, if a storm took out enough of the satellites, the internet definitely would go down. And I was like, oh, between those two conversations, I was like, shit.
Yeah, I think, this year is definitely a curveball year, but it's also a year of great awakening. And I think we're already sensing that. If you look at the younger generations, the TikTok generation, especially, they can't be propagandized by mainstream news.
No.
And they have so much access to information and knowledge and things that our generation was too passive to explore, or we couldn't explore as easily without the internet being as easy as it is now to navigate. And they're waking up out of a lot of lies that we've been told, right, as Americans especially, but also as religious people. And it's just, it's a difficult time. I could think of this year, I have a few titles I could use for this year. One is a year of electric change and shock. Another is escaping the cult. Another is a year of war and peace. So I think that it's scary to break out of long held belief systems, especially if it puts us against our communities or what we've grown up with. But there's a lot of warriorship that's required this year in learning how to have the strength to really face the truth and wake up out of belief systems that have felt cozy and comfortable to us, but are causing harm to others in some way.
Yeah. I mean, so let's go to this theme for a little while of like, nobody's putting up with bullshit anymore.
Yeah.
Because I did like at a protest related to the the Middle East. It was in some American city, but I saw a card that somebody was holding saying, "This isn't 2001. Nobody believes you anymore." And I remember 9/11 being the event that really activated me, because it was so obvious that this awful thing happened, which in my city, which was, verifiably awful. I had just gotten back from living at a meditation center for 7 months, 3 days before. And then this flailing right-wing government that lost the popular vote, probably didn't win the election. use that to just really, make propaganda happen and invade the wrong places to try to get this, evil person who supposedly acted alone, as if that's how anything works. And I remember those years of protest. I remember, you know, I hate to be a conspiracy theorist, but I remember going to many marches where there were hundreds of thousands of people, and the New York Times were reported as like 10,000 people, and would always point out the counter protests in support of the war that like 13 people were at, as if the
Yeah.
two were equal events. And so that's why I always find it a little bit annoying when people call George W. Bush a different type of, I mean, I think he's a different type of person than Donald Trump, but
Yes.
in terms of what he represents. So this is interesting because I have had conversations with a few like more libertarian conservative friends, because I'm really trying to listen to everyone. And the idea of spending money to bomb foreign countries really seems to be something that everybody's kind of over, you know?
Well, yes, I mean the younger people especially, Yeah, and the younger people are just getting older and they're stepping into more positions of power, and the old guard is reaching the ends of their lives, right? So that just by that alone, there's going to be a rapid turnover of of the way things are run, because there's a
Mm,
different ideological framework that
mm.
is in place for the younger generations. It's vastly different, you know.
Yeah, I mean, is that why there is this rush around the world to authoritarianism? Because that's the only way for a minority to control a majority, or?
I think it's a reaction, to the swell of people rising. You think about the Buddhist expression, the next Buddha is the Sangha, right?
Mhm.
And that very much is true astrologically. Like the next leadership is the community. It's not about this one person ruling on the top, right?
Yeah.
And so I think that threatens a lot of people in power, a lot of people with wealth, whose wealth and power depend upon um, this sort of brutalization of others, right? Or the oppression of others uh, to maintain that power and wealth.
Mm,
And so I think there's a scramble out of fear of losing that, right? To
mm,
sort of keep people under control. But that's not going to work. If anything, that's just going to make the revolution stronger.
mm. So I guess one thought that like I just had the thought of like more communitarian driven, power models. Like I remember going to some Occupy Wall Street meetings because I was traveling, and that was kind of cool because I had different friends in different cities at that point. And it was really interesting to see like the style of meeting that they ran. It did have structure, etc. But I'm thinking of like a parent teacher association meeting. Like it's really hard to have community based meetings. You really have to have good structures in place, good listening skills, good social emotional skills. And when you go on social media, sometimes it feels like we don't have those, and that's part
I
of.
know. Yeah, I mean, we don't have those at all in general. It's like the current political climate is like people just yelling from their soapboxes at one another and not actually having intelligent dialogues. And it's also the emotionalism being stoked, right? So that
Mm,
there's this cultish support of one side or the other that doesn't necessarily make sense. um I've been living in Dallas for the last few months helping my mom, and I normally live in more liberal places, and I've been hanging out with people who have vastly different political and religious ideas than I do. And when we really talk it through with love and openness, we're not that different.
mhm.
And it's just that I mean, especially Fox News watchers, but also, stereotypical Democrats. Like people have fallen into these traps of believing things without really thinking them through for themselves, or without being able to have more nuanced dialogues, right? It's like
Right.
all liberals are baby killers, right? And now we're seeing this woman who had just had to flee Texas because she couldn't have an abortion or a termination for a baby that was already dead, that would kill her potentially or make her, sterile if she gave birth to it. And it's like, okay, we need more nuanced dialogues. This
Right.
makes no sense. And I think Jupiter moving into Gemini this year will somehow help with that, or that's the highest potential, who knows, right? The
Right.
highest potential of Jupiter in Gemini is about questioning, dialoguing, holding paradox. Jupiter's the magnifying lens. And so there's some emphasis on, okay, we need to have meaningful dialogues, right?
Yeah.
We need to have more nuance. We can't just be pitted against each other. And that pitting against each other is also getting emphasized this year. But there are these opportunities to mitigate that also astrologically.
Yeah. I mean, I think about it, it does seem like there's a generational aspect of how we receive a major generational aspect of how we receive information. Obviously, I have so many friends. I go to the Fox News website every day because I'm just fascinated by the narrative construction, and it's a pretty brilliant, I mean, for propaganda, but it's a pretty
Yeah.
brilliant repetitive model. But there also seems to be a thing where, and again, these generalizations do not, every generalization has counter examples. So don't hold me to saying that I'm saying this universally, but it does seem like boomers tend to watch cable news, right?
Yes.
And which is a very interesting modality of trying to have some, whatever we think community interaction might be. It's one way. The show's on all the time. Obviously, if you watch Fox News, the people who watch Fox News just seem to get very, very angry, right?
Yes.
But I would say, CNN, MSNBC, there's still that sense of you're not really interacting. You're looking at the world. You're like, oh, these people on my screen are doing this to those people, but you're on your couch in your tube doing that, right? So it feels like social media was intended to be a step forward because we can sort of talk to each other as we're watching multiple streams of the
Yes.
world, but
It's a much more direct, information stream and a diversified information stream.
right. The only thing that seems to intervene on that is the algorithm, right? Where you're
Yeah.
actually not, you're not receiving the information that you're actually receiving information. You actually are watching Fox News, but it really feels like you're finding your own information,
Yeah, in some cases. I mean, it's different with different situations, right? But you do receive a lot of similar information, like
Right.
once they figure out what is compelling to you. And then deep fake stuff and,
Yeah.
uh, there are definitely problems with both
Yeah.
approaches, but I do think it's interesting to see how hard it is to propagandize the younger generations because there's not just one news channel that
Right.
everybody's watching.
Right. Right. Or three, there's not just the liberal and it does seem that there does seem to be more bending at the edges of what was classically considered liberal and what was classically considered conservative ideologies in some formats, like people having different like beliefs sometimes joining, sometimes not. It's not all one basket of beliefs, right?
Yeah, and I think that's increasing that kind of like, oops, like we're not on the same page,
I thought we were.
Yeah. But
You
like
you didn't get the vaccine? Wait. Oh, okay.
I did, but now I kind of regret it, but I did get it. But the one thing that has been polarizing within the left and the right has been the Israel-Palestine situation.
Hmm.
Like that the New York Times on the cover today just reported that how divided Democrats are over this situation, and it's imploding in a way, the Democratic Party. And it's ruin. I mean, if Biden needed to act not from morality, which one would hope one would act from, but from a purely political standpoint, which tends to be how politicians operate, he's in a bind. Like there's no approach that would be politically beneficial to him right now because it's so starkly divided.
Mm-hmm.
The
Yeah.
pro-Israel people and the pro-Palestine people. Which I'm still trying to wrap my head around that, and we don't need to get into it because it is so polarizing, but I mean, the younger people are 75% pro-Palestine, and the younger people are saying
Or
like,
pro ceasefire at least, right?
right, well, and they're like, I mean, I don't think being pro-Palestine is being anti-Israelis or, whatever. I think it's just being like, stop killing and massacring these people and displacing them and destroying their culture, their homes, and all the heroes that they revere. Like there's no reason to kill babies and children and massacre civilians, without any strategy or attempt to avoid civilian
Yeah.
casualty.
I mean, that's been, I did a podcast about just dialogue around this, but I've never, just in terms of maybe the age of thought that is coming to an end, I've never seen a more polarizing event just listening to people, where the thing that I've noticed is when people describe their their pain, they will often describe somebody else saying something that what the person actually said was, I'm for this. But what they're describing is having heard that person is anti this other thing, right? So
Yeah.
somebody will describe, I'm pro ceasefire, and maybe a Jewish person will have heard them say, I'm anti-Semitic, right?
Yes, 100%.
And I've never seen an issue where, just in terms of the structure of dualistic thought, I've never seen a political issue where it was that much like sort of ascribing when people said they were for something, which sounds pretty good, like I'm pro-Semitic, right? Then other people might hear, well, you're a Zionist pig or something like that, right?
Yeah.
So I've never heard, this is the thing, it's intensified in just listening to people, how much people mishear what other people are saying. And I'm like, I don't think they actually said they're against that when they said that thing. And people are like, no, 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 you need to study the history. And I'm like,
Yeah.
I don't know enough. I'm just going by what I heard. And I didn't hear what you heard in what they said. And that I've never had a situation more like that in just listening to people.
I know. I mean, because, you think about Shambhala, right? And like how married everyone was to this ideology and this beautiful, paradigm that we were both part of, right? And then when it started to crumble and allegations came out that were very real, there was that clinging to like, no, this can't be true, right? Because it was a threat to your community, your ideology, your everyday life, your belief system. It's just it was too much of a threat to like your entire existence. And I think that that's the case. Like, in Israel, there's such a connection, a link between community and ideology and religion and the state of Israel that it's really hard to be objective, and then when it feels like the Holocaust wasn't that long ago, right? And then we have Hamas is anti-Zionist, which that's in their charter to be anti-Zionism, but it sounds like I want to kill all Jews, but that's actually not even like that's not the idea. It's more about Zionism than Judaism, and that has to do with the history of pushing people who had been living there out for 2,000 years and raping their women and massacring their children and all of that. And so it didn't start well, so it started with like a lot of righteous resentment, and on the Palestinian part. So now it's like, okay, where do we go from here? Because Israel exists and Palestinians need to exist too. But there's so much anger and rage and then where do we go from here? But I do think astrologically, we're going to see something shift by springtime, something big. And I don't know exactly what that is yet, but we have this powerful eclipse season followed by the Jupiter-Uranus conjunction. So on an astrological level, I do think we're going to see something happening that might be hopeful, that might be peaceful, or it's like a step towards peace. But
Oh, that would be so good. Yeah,
oh my God,
that's been, and I think a lot of people who are going online, I think the vast majority of people are just like, what happened to just wanting peace and not being considered naive
I
for
know.
that, Like that's the thing that always bums me out is like if you're pro peace, it's like you don't understand the dynamics. And it's like maybe if you're waving a gun, you don't understand how being a human works. I just want that
I
to like
agree with you.
be an option on the table, like just
Yes.
nonviolence, return to that as like something that's not naive, that's actually more evolved, than like strategic violence.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, or going into somebody's land and like indiscriminately killing their children, like that's,
Mhm.
and then I'm like, I'm against that. And then it's like, you're naive. I'm like, no.
No, yeah, like if that's naive, I want to live in the naive place, right?
Yeah, then may I be naive,
Where's the naive spot to live in,
Beam me up to the naive planet, please. But agree. I mean, you and I are Buddhists, and it's like we don't even kill mosquitoes,
I
Um,
mean, sometimes I by accident, but I try. I do my best.
or if someone near me kills a gnat, I'll do like a prayer, like I'm
Right.
I'm very conscious of like treating all beings as if they were my mother in a past life, and that sense of sacredness, or being I keep thinking of being in solitary retreat and having this deep reverence for the fly in my
Mm,
cabin, um and then imagining killing somebody's family
mhm,
for no who were not a threat, and I'm like, I don't understand.
mhm.
It just doesn't compute, and maybe that does make me naive, but again, like, I wish that didn't.
Right, right. Yeah,
And
yeah.
I keep thinking, is this like Buddhist conditioning that I'm so against brutality, violence, and death? And then I'm like, no, I remember I accidentally killed a lizard once when I was 7 and I wept for like a week, like
Mm,
that's just my nature.
mm.
I don't relate I don't relate to wanting anyone to be killed or tortured.
Right, right. So can we get back to the tech conversation? Because I feel like you're going to have like good and crazy, Star Trek level insights into where things might be going. So first, I want to lay out my issue with tech, because I really like technology,
Yeah.
but it never seems like we have technological advances like what we are able to do always predates our readiness to do that thing, and that there's a famous Dr. King quote where he says like the means by which we live have outstripped the reasons for which we live, and then he says we have guided missiles but misguided men. Basically,
Yes.
the humans have to evolve to the point that they can even be with the missiles without causing great harm. So I do feel like social media, like when you look at what it's done, I mean, on the flip side of this, it's greatly increased adolescent depression, anxiety. That's
Yes.
that's very scary for me as a parent. And I think it's also like, oh, you struggle in your relationships with like 10 or 12 other people. How about having relationships with 3,000 people in public simultaneously? And it's like, that sounds like a great step forward. And in many ways it is, but the social emotional development that would be needed to hold that, and it feels like AI is going to exactly the same place. Like the people who are advocating for it, it's like this is going to be amazing what we can do here, and it sounds amazing. Like when you look at, I mean, ChatGPT isn't that amazing as I've used it, but I get that it's going to really amazing new places. But there seems to be a lot of danger in not knowing why we're doing this thing and just knowing that we can do this thing, you know?
100%. I mean, and if in the wrong hands, AI is like extremely dangerous. And I do think we are like one button away from like absolute oblivion, like I
Does
do
that
think
happen in 2024?
you know what? I keep thinking of that Bucky Fuller quote that goes, whether it is to be utopia or oblivion will be a touch and go relay race right up to the final moment.
Great. Fun times.
Yeah, but it's also like I think that the depression of the younger generation is actually important. It's obviously a crisis and horrible, but it's important because they're like, this can't be how the world is. We can't sustain this because we are looking. We're not looking away like the other generation.
Yeah.
And somehow there has to be that ability to look and to keep your heart open and to construct a new reality based on that looking and keeping your heart open. But in terms of technology, yeah, I mean, 100%. And I think that's part of what the Aquarian age ideally will be about is we already have the means to like clean up, plastic. You grow, mushrooms have the ability to like take inorganic material and make it organic again, even nuclear waste, right? We know how to do things. We just don't have the funding. We don't have the prioritization in place, or we actually waste like 70% of the world's food. It's not an overpopulation problem. It's a distribution problem, right? We're not living sensibly with the earth and with each other, like privatized prisons and everything being privatized has led to immense problems that are inhumane and all about profit over people. And I think that if we can first correct our ideological frameworks and priorities and value human life over profit, right? Then there's so much technology we've already developed that we can implement in order to reconstruct reality. And we can. And so I think it is going to take like the younger generations coming of age to actually steer the ship differently, right? Because I just don't see it happening with the older generations and with all the lobbyists that are in place in DC. It's like, how do we get there?
We love you, Gen Xers and Boomers, but this is we love you.
Step aside. Let the Gen Zers take over.
And Julian and I are both, I'm a few years older than you, but we're both on the very tail end of Gen X, so we can talk. We'll step aside too.
Yeah, I'm stepping aside.
I'm tired.
I've been empowering the millennials and the Gen Zers for a while now. Like, you guys got it, like I feel like I've been a cheerleader for them. And when the older generations have been so hard on them, and I don't feel that way. I think they're like awesome. Like they're so courageous, and they just and in a way it's like, oh, the world is going to end, right? They grew up with that message, like climate change is going to destroy the planet. And they're like, well, what do we have to lose? We have to speak the truth.
Right. Yeah, they do that. That does seem to be like everything else seems to be like, okay, if it was just the problem of violence in the world or, racism or patriarchy, it's like, okay, we could go a few more rounds around the samsaric wheel, cause a great amount of suffering, but human society would still be here, right? With the climate crisis, it's like, oh no, this might we don't have a few more times around the suffering wheel to figure that out, right?
No, we don't. It's urgent, right? And I always hold the highest possibilities, right? Because if we aren't, then it's not possible. And someone, at least a few people need to be holding the highest possibilities in order to make them a reality. And I do feel like there can be massive changes this year that can lead us to a more positive outcome. But it does require every individual rising, right? And us joining together in this coalition of hearts and not giving up and not falling into despair, even if we're looking, at the reality of the horrors of the world. but yeah, you know, I keep thinking of Bucky Fuller because I feel like he should be the guru of this moment. I mean,
Mm,
but we can go back and read his words because he really got it, you know?
mm,
Um, but I have a few quotes I love of his. One is, "We are called to be architects of the future, not its victims," you
mm,
know, and that's very Aquarian age, right? We've got
mm.
to construct the new reality instead of just passively being the victims of the current reality.
Right, right. So that, I
And
mean, that's an interesting point, right? The notion of overcoming, like, I mean, obviously when there's an oppressor and oppressed, when there's harm caused, there needs to be an
yeah,
acknowledgement of the harm, but also viewing oneself as kind of like victim can also be very disempowering, you know, like just to look
yeah,
at the generational aspect, like, you know, if Gen Zers are like, hey, boomers and Gen X's, you fucked us over, you know. Like from a Buddhist standpoint, it's like, well, it was actually karmically, it was your time to be born too. I mean, and it's not wrong that our generation and previous generations did not handle, you know, the climate crisis, for example. But that idea of like, how do we empower rather than victimize when we're in a difficult situation is an interesting, just kind of psychological, spiritual shift in perspective.
yeah. And I mean, obviously there are victims all in the planet right now. I mean, that's
Of
not to
course.
say that, but it's just sort of like, if you can be the architect, don't fall into despair, you know,
Right.
and don't just allow things to happen if you can do something about it.
Mm,
And um and then there's this other quote that I love, and it goes, "It is now highly feasible to take care of everybody on earth at a higher standard of living than any have ever known. It no longer has to be you or me. Selfishness is unnecessary. War is obsolete. It is a matter of converting high technology from weaponry to livingry."
and what year was that Buckminster Fuller quote from?
I think it was the 60s.
Right, right. So
Yeah.
that was the early, that was the first. So that, I mean, this is a way, it's really interesting, you know, to set these generations apart, because if the 60s were the first moment of the Aquarian age, that was the boomers. They just then
Yes.
went in a different direction as a general generalization. Again, not to overgeneralize any specific person's experience, but that is
Yes.
an interesting thing that they were the Gen Zers and then something
Exactly.
shifted.
Right. I mean, the civil rights movement and, you know, like this future thinking and utopia thinking and like, how can we live differently and live in more peace? And there's a lot of Eastern philosophy that started seeping in. But I don't know. I keep thinking like, what happened, you know, and it was like sort of the late 70s into the early 80s, what happened? And it was like they gave up psychedelics for cocaine. I don't know.
That's a big shift. You know, mushrooms to cocaine will
I
take you in a
know.
different direction for sure.
But I do think that the themes of that time are returning, and it's now time to really implement
Mm,
those themes in a lasting way, right? Not as like, that was an interesting flash in the pan, you know, it's like in
yeah,
a way we're constructing the new reality based off of those
right.
ideals, you know?
S- So I guess my last question is returning to your work, because you've become, it's interesting. I didn't know I was going to become a decently known like Buddhist teacher, psychological thinker. I always wanted to like write poetry and fiction, but you've become a well-known voice in the astrology community, right? Your book was a bestseller, The Stars Within You. I do recommend people following you and getting your updates via your website, etherealculture.com. But if somebody wanted to kind of study astrology in this kind of grounded scientific like way, like how would you like, I know a little bit about it, you know, I understand like sun, moon, rising sign, what those mean. The houses, I always have to look at like a chart of like, wait, what is the sixth house and what is the this house? And I mean, obviously reading your book, but if somebody actually wanted to study astrology, like what are the next steps to actually using it in a way that it's, you know, informative?
Yeah, well, I think starting with a book like mine is really good, getting the fundamentals in place, really understanding the on an intuitive level, the archetypal energies of each sign, and then the houses correspond with the signs, so that gets easier once you understand that. And then understanding the planets and their archetypal energies as well. And then you start weaving it together. And the best way to learn is to just keep listening to talks. I love Stephen Forrest, or reading books. I love Stephen Forrest books, Liz Green's books, just like absorbing information. But most importantly, it's applying it, right? So it's just reading as many charts as possible. So go to astro.com, pull up the chart of someone you know really well, and then look up each placement, like the sun in this, the moon in that, and think about that person you know so well and apply that to what you know of the person. And then you'll start to have a deeper intuitive understanding of how these energies manifest. And then keep doing that. Just read as many charts as possible that way, where you're literally looking up everything. And then it starts to become second nature, because it's a language, right? And the only way you can learn the language is through practice, right? And so, you have to be a little bit obsessed with it. I think a lot of people get into astrology because they're like lovers, and they're like wanting to understand this person they've fallen in love with, and then this other person they've fallen in love with.
And why it keeps not working out to fall in love with that person over and over again.
Like, why do I feel such passionate desire for this person? And it's like, oh, my Mars is on their moon. Okay. And then, or like, what do you think they're thinking or feeling? Okay, I need to understand their moon and their Venus and their, so that is often a big motivator getting obsessed with it. But it does require repetition and passion, because it is a complex language and system.
That's a beautiful piece of advice, though, to work backwards, starting with someone you know well, and then look at their chart and start to, that's very conversational and cool.
And then it's not memorizing. It's like really feeling, because it is an intuitive art. Astrology is intuition, psychology, storytelling, cosmology. It's just like everything. It's like astronomy, it's geometry. There's so many things involved in it, but it's primarily this intuitive art. So if you work with it intuitively more than intellectually in terms of memorization, it'll come much faster.
All right. Thank you so much. I think this is a good place to leave off for today. It's always great to hear your perspective and spend an hour talking to you. And again, we both love all the generations, so nobody get mad at either of us if something we said was anti one generation. And it's really just talking about movements in history. And
we love everyone. We're Buddhists.
We're Buddhists. Like any mosquitoes, spotted lanternflies. I don't think y'all have those in either Dallas or Los Angeles, but that is the biggest dilemma, because you're supposed to kill those because they kill trees, right? So that's the hardest Buddhist dilemma in the inside. I know and they're beautiful too. They're like a gorgeous little, like weird hipster looking butterfly. So but Juliana McCarthy, everybody should check out The Stars Within You and Ethereal Culture. And if and when the internet goes down sometime this spring, you can think of, it's not Juliana's fault. She's just the one that told you so.
It may not be that. It could be
maybe something else.
Event, like death of
anything weird that happens this spring. Think of Juliana McCarthy. All right. Good to keep sense of humor in difficult times. So thanks so much, Juliana.
Thank you so much. You're such a sane, amazing, loving voice in this crazy time.
Well, I feel I always appreciate our friendship quite a lot. So, all right, for the road home, this is Ethan Nichtern, and we'll see you next time.
This has been the Road Home Podcast with Ethan Nichtern. For more info, visit ethannichtern.com and dharmamoon.com.